Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam.
And I'm Marcia.
And we like World War II media and we want to talk about it.
Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. I just want to start out with a little PSA. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. So you can find us on Spotify and on Apple and on Amazon, and you can rate us 5 stars. We would very much appreciate it. And also, if you have a friend who doesn't know enough about Market Garden, do send them this episode, because this episode is about A Bridge Too Far, which came out in 1977. It was directed by Richard Attenborough and written by William Goldman. It's based on a book, A Bridge Too Far, by Cornelius Ryan. The film follows a British division under Major General Roy Urquhart during Operation Market Garden in the Netherlands in September of 1944. So at the very almost end of the war. It was a co-production between the United Kingdom and the United States and was shot almost exclusively on location in the Netherlands. What did you think of this movie, Sam?
I really liked it. It's long. I mean, it's like almost 3 hours, I think. But I thought it was really good. I mean, I had read the book, which is 600 pages and does not feel like 600 pages. So I'll say the same thing about the movie. It's almost 3 hours, but it doesn't feel like it's 3 hours. There's some great acting in it. We'll obviously get into it, but like Robert Redford is in it. So it's fun to see him. And Michael Caine and, a whole bunch of different people. And I think they did a really good job of articulating why Market Garden failed without making it into a history lesson that kind of beats you over the head. I thought they did a really good job of telling it as a narrative and making it make sense, if that makes sense. What did you think of it?
I like it quite a lot, actually. I did know quite a few bits and pieces about Market Garden, and I had seen this movie a couple weeks ago, but when I was prepping for the podcast, I rewatched the movie, and it suddenly all made sense to me, like all the different pieces of information, because it's a lot. Like, there's a lot happening in Operation Market Garden. And I'd been to several locations in the Netherlands that played a big role in Market Garden, but I knew sort of what happened at each location, but I didn't quite know how it all fit together, and I do now, so thank you, movie. I did think it was long. I thought it was strangely funny in places too. Some of it's really amusing, and the acting is quite good. If you want to compare it to, what did we watch last week? The Battle of Britain. It's a similar movie, but I thought this had a better narrative and it gave you something to root for a little bit more than it did in the Battle of Britain movie. So yeah, I like it. And there's 7 or 8 major actors in this that I all really liked in this, so it gets high points from me.
I do wonder if part of what makes the movie so good is that the book is really good. Cornelius Ryan also wrote The Longest Day, which we might cover at some point. He just does such a good job of telling this story in a way that maintains tension and, you're not blanking out when you see a whole page of like, here's what this group was doing and here's what that group was doing and here's whatever. He does a really good job of making it seem like urgent and immediate and super, super interesting.
Yeah, I think I might pick it up. Because Market Garden is so extensive, could you maybe give a little summary of it for our listeners?
Yeah, I would love to. In June of 1944, obviously, the Normandy landings occurred. So now the Allies are on the continent and they've been making these really fast pushes inland and they're kind of going in two directions. So you have Patton and the Americans making a drive in the sort of south, and then you have Montgomery and the British making a drive in the north. But the problem that you're having is that the Germans still hold all of these major ports. And so the Allies are making a lot of progress, yes, but what's happening is that they're really stretching out their supply lines. And so Montgomery has this great idea for this big push into Germany. And here's how we're going to end the war and we're going to resolve all our problems. So Operation Market Garden was launched on September 17th, 1944 by the Allies, and it combined 2 parts. So we have Market, which is the largest airborne operation in history, and Garden, which is the ground offensive that ties into it. So if you want to kind of picture this in your mind on a map, in the south you have the Dutch-Belgian border, and that's where Montgomery and the British troops are kind of gathered. That's where their push has sort of stalled out. And what they want to do is they want to make a drive north through the Netherlands to Arnhem, And what they're going to do at that point is they're going to wheel east, and that's going to take them into the heart of the German industrial heartland of the Ruhr. And so, in order to do that, they have to pass over all of these bodies of water. So there's all these bridges, etc. The other complication is that Arnhem lies 65 miles behind enemy lines. So if they want to make this drive north through the Netherlands successful, what they have to do is they have to drop 35,000 paratroopers behind enemy lines. And their job is going to be to take and hold all of these bridges to allow the British Armored Division, supported by infantry, to make that drive north. Essentially, you've got airborne troops from Britain, the US, and Poland who are trying to seize and hold the bridges, and they're going to hold them open so the British armored forces can advance through them. So the theory here is they're going to outflank the German defenses by heading north before they go east. And unfortunately, in practice, this plan is pretty ambitious. If it sounds like a lot like it relies on speed, luck, and precision, it really does. The armored advance encountered stiffer resistance and more difficult terrain than they thought, so it stalled out. Lightly armed airborne troops faced off against two unexpected panzer divisions and lost precious time having to rebuild bridges and protect their own drop zones for later supply and reinforcement drops. So this meant that the final bridge at Arnhem couldn't be held. Many airborne troops were cut off and captured, and the whole attempt lasted 9 days.
Instead of 36 hours that they planned, I think.
Yeah, they were hoping to be in Arnhem within 2 days, and that did not occur.
No, they all really wanted it to succeed, but it's very much a case of everything that can go wrong will go wrong with Operation Market Garden. There's not a single element of the plan that goes as planned.
Someone that Ryan quoted in his book, and I can't remember who it was, but they were talking about how with a military operation, generally speaking, you want it to be 75% pretty much a sure thing, and 25% can be left up to luck. And with Market Garden, it was 75% was going to be up to luck, and 25% was a sure thing.
That sounds like annoying odds to me. Yeah, let's get into the plot because it's a long one. I went through the difficult task of writing the entire opening scene for you all. The reason I did is because it quite nicely explains what has happened up till then and what the thought process is. We don't jump straight into the movie. We open with real footage and a voiceover by a woman, and she says, "It's hard to remember now, but Europe was like this in 1944. The Second World War was in its fifth year and still going Hitler's way. German troops control most of Europe. D-Day changed all that. D-Day, June 6, 1944, when the Allied forces under the command of General Eisenhower landed on the northern coast of France. By July, they were able to begin their own offensive. By August, Paris was liberated. Everywhere the Germans retreated. But with the Allied victories came problems. Supplies still had to be driven from Normandy, over 400 miles away, and became dangerously short. The Allied advance began to come to a halt. Another problem facing Eisenhower was this. His two most famous generals, Patton, who was in the south, and Montgomery, who was in the north, disliked each other intensely. The long-standing rivalry had never been more fierce. There simply was not enough supplies for both armies. Each wanted to be the one to defeat the Germans. Each wanted to beat the other to Berlin. In September of 1944, Montgomery devised a new and spectacular plan given the code name Market Garden. Eisenhower, under great pressure from his superiors, finally sided with Montgomery, and Market Garden became a reality. The plan, like so many plans and so many wars before it, was meant to end the fighting by Christmas and bring the boys back home.
Yeah. So Eisenhower, his whole thing was he was determined to free the port of Antwerp in order to alleviate the supply issue. And this was his whole thing. He was like, look, we're still bringing supplies in off the beaches at Normandy. That is super inconvenient. What we have to do is open this port. So he's not interested in, he's getting these suggestions from Montgomery being like, oh, well, let's give me all the resources and I'll drive to Berlin. And Eisenhower's like, it's just not realistic. Honestly, we need to be dealing with the things that we can actually do and that'll actually make a difference. But Monty kind of got lucky because Eisenhower is super keenly interested in the opportunity to make use of the Allied airborne forces. Obviously, they've been dropped in Normandy, but they haven't really been given an opportunity on their own to see what they can do. And another thing is that the Germans at this point have begun launching V 2 rockets from Holland, which are landing on London. And this necessitates some kind of quick response in order to prevent this from happening any further. And so when Monty comes to Eisenhower with this plan, there's a couple of other factors in here. It's not necessarily that Eisenhower got pressured into it by his superiors. There were elements of the plan that he also liked.
I'm sure. I mean, there were a lot of people who liked this plan. And to be fair, if it had worked, it would have been a brilliant operation. But I guess a couple too many things went wrong. So I think the movie does a great job at giving you context right out of the gate. If you compare that again to the Battle of Britain, where I was like, what's going on? Where are we? What are we? I don't know. Here you immediately know what's just happened in Holland and in France. And this is where we're going, and this is why we're doing this. So I thought that was quite nice. I also did really like all the real imagery from World War II as an opening point, and after that, the movie starts in earnest. So the first movie scene is of a Dutch family. They're played respectively by Siem Vroom, Erik van het Woud, and Marlies van Alkmaar. They are a father, a wife, and a son. That's a weird way to say it. They are a mother, a father, and a son, and they are in Arnhem, and they are members of the resistance. It's pretty subtle in the beginning, but you quickly find out that they are. They are seen talking on the phone, having learned that the Germans are kind of panicking, and in the scene quickly after we see them retreat. However, we learn very quickly that the retreat is not to last, and I want to ask you a question, Sam. Did you have subtitles for the Dutch in this?
Interesting question because when I first downloaded this movie, there were no subtitles for anything that wasn't in English. So I downloaded a new version. But because I had already seen the first scene, I just didn't watch it again. So I don't know. But actually, I must have had subtitles for the Dutch later in the movie. So I'm going to say yes. Yes, I did.
Perfect, because there's quite a lot of it in Dutch in here. I do want to say, if you want to watch it in a way that's less difficult, you can watch it on MGM Plus if you have it.
I had to sail the high seas for this one again this week.
Yep, it's difficult with these old-timey movies sometimes. But hopefully it'll have subtitles, because when I was watching it with English subtitles because closed captions often tell you who's talking, which is helpful, and the Dutch wasn't subtitled. So I don't know. I'm not sure if there's much hope.
I remember this part in the book really clearly. Ryan talking pretty extensively about how the Germans at this point are kind of on the run through the Netherlands. So people are coming out of their houses and they're seeing like just the German army in shambles. There's Germans who have stolen baby carriages and they're carrying their machinery in them. They've stolen bicycles, anything that they can get to help them get out of the Netherlands and back to Germany faster. That's what they're doing. And so, of course, the Dutch are ecstatic about this because they think the Allies are going to be on their doorstep any minute. And they're getting radio broadcasts from London being like, the Allies are already over the border. The war is going to be over soon. And so everyone's very enthusiastic. But then after a few days, this retreat starts to slow and the German army starts to kind of get its shit together. And people start to get this distinctly ominous sense that perhaps the war is not almost about to be over. At the German Western Front HQ, because we are getting the German perspective on this as well. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, played by Wolfgang Price, and his Chief of Staff, General Gunther Blumentritt, played by Hans von Borsody, review the dire situation facing the German army. So at this point, Hitler's interference with the way his generals were trying to run the war was having direct consequences, rather than enabling them to make strategic retreats, to regroup, to meet the Allies again in situations that were more favorable. They were forced to hold out at all costs during the Battle of Normandy. So different armies are in shambles. You have the Germans fighting for dear life in these little isolated pockets to hold these various ports where they're all surrounded by the Allies, but they're not allowed to surrender. Von Rundstedt had actually been removed from his post when Hitler asked him how to proceed after the invasion of Normandy, and he replied, "End the war, you fool." But he was reinstated after two successors in the span of about 2 months couldn't do better. So he's back. And he's picking up a shit situation and he's going to have to figure out what to do with it.
I did like this actor, by the way, or this choice of making him this kind of cynical, almost sarcastic leader. I thought the Germans were portrayed as much more serious than the Germans in Battle of Britain. I'll stop comparing it to Battle of Britain in a moment, by the way, but they're so similar yet so different.
Yeah, for sure.
So we jump from the German HQ to General Browning's HQ in England, where we see a bunch of press discussing Operation Market Garden. So we begin with Lieutenant General Frederick Browning, played by Dick Bogart. He's a deputy commander of the 1st Allied Airborne Army. So he's the big chief in this bunch of people.
Yes, he's been chosen to command the whole thing. And I have a passage here from the book that's taken from the final conference at Montgomery's headquarters on Operation Market Garden from September 10th, 1944. And it says, on the narrow corridor that would carry the armored drive, there were 5 major bridges to take. They had to be seized intact by airborne assault. It was the 5th, the crucial bridge over the lower Rhine at a place called Arnhem, 64 miles behind the German lines, that worried Lieutenant General Frederick Browning, Deputy Commander, 1st Allied Airborne Army. Pointing to the Arnhem Bridge on the map, he asked, how long will it take the armor to reach us? Field Marshal Montgomery replied briskly, 2 days. Still looking at the map, Browning said, we can hold it for 4. Then he added, but sir, we might be going a bridge too far.
Har har, there it is. Yeah,
Do a shot.
Browning is pretty critical of this mission, but he also really wants it to go ahead.
I don't know that he was openly critical of the mission. I think that he had some reservations about the haste with which it was arranged. I mean, if you think about the other airborne landings they had planned, they took months and they have a week to plan this one. So I think he was a little hesitant about that. But I also think he did want the opportunity to use the airborne troops. So
We'll see if he's gonna feel the same way after. So next we have Major General Maxwell Taylor, played by Paul Maxwell, which I thought was funny. He is the CEO of the 101st Airborne, as you might remember from Band of Brothers. And he used to drop near Eindhoven to capture the bridges there, and one of them is in Son, which is not pictured in Band of Brothers, but Easy Company did work to rebuild that bridge.
yes, anytime I hear General Taylor, I just picture Joe Toy from Band of Brothers when he's asked where his boots are and he says, in Washington, up General Taylor's ass.
We also meet Brigadier General James Gavin, played by Ryan O'Neill. He's division commander of the U.S. Airborne Division, and he used to hold the bridge across the River Maas in Grave and the Maaswaal Canal. And he's also supposed to take and hold the bridge across the River Waal in Nijmegen. It's really difficult to speak English and Dutch at the same time, by the way. And then we meet I want to say our hero character of this movie. It's Major General Urquhart, played by Sean Connery. He will lead the British airborne assault and hold the bridge at Arnhem. And he is told he has to hold it for 2 days, as we just said. I mean, good luck. And also here is Major General Stanislav Sosabowski, played by Gene Hackman, who I thought was really funny in his role.
I thought Gene Hackman was great in this.
He was good, wasn't he? I really liked him, yeah.
He did such a good job of, like, his character doesn't speak that much, but his face says volumes.
I think it's quite good that he doesn't speak that much because he's supposed to have a Polish accent, and I'm not sure how good it is. So
He's trying his best.
yeah. Anyway, he is brigade commander of the Polish 1st Independent Parachute Brigade of the Polish Armed Forces, and he is to go with Urquhart, and he's immediately suspicious. He's like, I don't know if this is a good plan, guys. And I guess he's right.
Yeah, there's a little scene where he says to, I think it's Browning, he's like, look, I'm going to need you to give me a letter saying that I had to follow your orders because I don't want to be held responsible when this all goes tits up, basically. And this is based on something that more or less happened in real life because Market Garden, similar to Dieppe, was like the 10th iteration of a plan, right? It's like they had all these, they were going to do Operation Comet and then that got canceled. Then they were going to do this and that got canceled. And now we're on Market Garden, which is like a mutation of the other ones. And so before Operation Comet, which was a previous iteration of Market Garden, the real Sosabowski said the same thing to Browning, basically like, I'm going to need a piece of paper showing that, like, I'm following orders here and this was not my idea.
And then Browning kind of replies, do you really want me to write this letter? And he's like, no, sir. But really, he doesn't want him to write the letter, but he doesn't want to admit it. Anyway, there's a mention of another brass in here, which I wrote down because it's useful to know. He is Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks, played by Edward Fox, who was also in the Battle of Britain, so go check that out, that episode. And he will command 30 Corps, which are the ground forces, of the British Second Army with about 20,000 vehicles.
Yes, and I do find that each of these characters is distinct enough that anytime you see them, you kind of know which part of the invasion plan that you're in. You know, you see Gavin and you're like, okay, we're with the and I felt that was pretty easy to follow.
It is if you pay attention to the first scene, to this first scene, basically. If you don't, then it's kind of, wait, who's this guy again?
Yeah, but I mean, in the old days when they made movies, they didn't think people would be on their phones half the time.
Fair point.
So we get a handful of small scenes wherein we start seeing the cracks a little bit. We're learning some ominous signs. So we learn that there will be jumps over a span of 3 days. They essentially don't have enough aircraft and gliders to get everyone over there at once. So they're like, right, we're going to get a bunch of guys over there on the first day. The second day, we're going to bring more guys and supplies. The third day, the Polish are going to come. There's going to be some more supplies. And of course, this is going to mean that on the ground, the airborne are going to have to defend their drop zones because the Germans are going to pretty quickly figure out that they're getting more supplies dropped that way. And they're going to be jumping in daylight for the first time. When they jumped at Normandy, it was at night.
Should I?
Sure, yeah, go for it.
The scene in which we find this out is between Captain Harry, or Harry, Bestebrotje, played by Peter Faber, who's Dutch. In the movie, he plays a Dutch liaison officer with the 82nd. He's kind of having this conversation with Gavin. Gavin is kind of upset with him. He's like, why didn't you tell me that the bridge over Nijmegen was so hard to take? They do a good job of portraying real men in this film.
Yeah, for sure. And it's another kind of example of the British have lots of opportunities to listen to actual Dutch people who know the terrain and know what the Germans are up to and are actually on the ground, and they're not really doing it. And I'm part of that is that there had been a couple of major issues earlier in the war where the Dutch resistance had been infiltrated by the Germans, and this resulted in a lot of Allied agents getting killed. And so there was this sense among the higher ups anyway that potentially information coming from the Dutch resistance or coming from Dutch people was not reliable. But yeah, this is not the first time that the British will get information from the Dutch and not take it seriously. We also learned that the British airborne troops are going to have to land 8 miles from their objective at Arnhem. And this is due to a couple reasons. The terrain is not super favorable for a landing. They don't want to be landing right in town, like on buildings and stuff like that. They need to be able to have an open area. But all the areas that are really close to Arnhem have really massive anti-aircraft batteries built up. And so they're worried about that. So as you can imagine, landing 8 miles from your objective presents all kinds of obstacles. You have to get your guys to the objective once they're on the ground, and obviously you lose a little bit of the element of surprise. We also learned that the radios potentially might not have signal strength over that great of a distance, and we learned that there are reports from the Dutch resistance that indicate that Field Marshal Model, played by Walter Kohut, is staying at Hotel Hartenstein in Oosterbeek, which means that the Germans still mean business in the area. They wouldn't have a field marshal there if there weren't major German movements happening. And recon photos obtained by Major Fuller, played by Frank Grimes, support this claim because 2 panzer divisions appear to be nearby. So this is tanks, right? They're seeing that the Germans have pretty extensive tank divisions nearby. And this has not been factored into the plan. The Allies are firm in their belief that they're going to be fighting old men and kids when they go into the Netherlands. They do not think that they're going to have to deal with, actual resistance. But at this point, the ball is rolling and no one's willing to listen. They're going, look, we've canceled this many airborne jumps. We don't want to cancel anymore. We're going to proceed and see what happens.
I really like Major Fuller. He is not a real person, but he was very likely based on Major Brian Urquhart, not related to Roy Urquhart in this movie. And they probably did it to avoid confusion. And shortly before the start of Operation Market Garden, codebreakers at Bletchley Park intercepted and decrypted a number of German messages that supported the resistance reports. So they didn't only not want to listen to the Dutch, they also didn't want to listen to their own codebreakers. And Hotel Hartenstein is now the home of the Airborne Museum in Oosterbeek. And also near there is St. Elizabeth's Gasthuis, which is the hospital, and the Airborne War Cemetery, and also which we'll see later in the movie, get to Horst's house. And it's all fairly close together, so if you're ever in Oosterbeek, you can do all this probably within 3 hours. You can see all of it.
I need to do that.
Yeah, you need to come over and do that for sure. So we meet with General Horrocks' 30 Corps at the Belgian-Dutch border, and they're preparing for their speedy drive north. It's very important that they are speeding because they have to get the rest of the supplies up to the people at the bridges and all that. And leading the way is Lieutenant Colonel Joe van der Leur. He is part of the Irish Guards Armor Division, and he's played by Michael Caine.
Yeah, I mean, not just supplies, but to reinforce them, right? Like, you're dropping these paratroopers behind enemy lines, and they have very little, like, anti-tank equipment, for example, and they're very lightly armed. So while they might be able to take advantage of the element of surprise and seize these bridges, if they are surrounded by Germans, they're not going to be able to hold them for very long. So they need the armored corps to get up there lickety-split.
And I feel like General Horrocks is very convinced that they'll just do it. He's very enthusiastic in his speech where he's telling all the men that they'll just fix it because they're great.
We get this whole big taking off and flying scene, and it's really, I mean, this is bigger than Normandy, right? Like, in terms of an airborne liftoff. And so you've got gliders, you've got planes, you've got troop carriers, you got all kinds of stuff. South of Arnhem, General Bichrit, he's Corps commander of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, played by Maximilian Schnell. He watches the Allies fly in, and his units are going to be important because essentially what had happened was there were these two SS Panzer Corps divisions, and these guys are tough, right? They're the elite of the German army, and they got a little battered after the Normandy landing, so they were actually sent to Arnhem to recoup and recover and get re-outfitted and all this stuff. So they're there thinking that this is a quiet spot, we're going to be chill, and then they look up in the sky and they see this massive Allied armada flying overhead.
And what's very cool about this very long scene is that it's almost all real. I looked this up. They had over 1,000 landings of people. So all the parachutes you see in the air, there are many. They're all real drops, which I thought was so neat.
Yeah, it's a really cool visual.
And it looks like that in real life too. They do a commemoration of the drop near Renkum. That doesn't mean anything to you, but they do it in like a big open field where they actually jumped, and it looks the exact same way. So it's so neat.
That is really cool.
So the next scene, we kind of move near Arnhem for the final objective in the north, and things begin to go wrong almost immediately, because subsequent to their drop 8 miles from Arnhem, Urquhart learns that their mode of transportation to get to the bridge, which are outfitted jeeps from the Special Jeep Squadron, have been badly damaged and now have to get to Arnhem on foot, which is quite far. And as expected, the radios don't work, and Urquhart can't reach anybody to tell them that they've had this misfortune, and he can't even reach his own battalion CO. So he's in the middle of nowhere, in a field, and he doesn't have any armored vehicles that he was promised, and no jeeps to get a lift on. So he's pretty screwed.
Yeah, this real sense that I got from Urquhart from the book and from the movie was just this sense of frustrated powerlessness. So much of this is outside of his control, but he's doing his absolute best anyways.
Yeah. Sean Connery is such a particular actor, but I thought he was really good in this.
Yeah, I thought he was good in this too. In the same end of things, Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, played by Anthony Hopkins, he's the CO of 2nd Battalion of the Parachute Regiment, 1st Parachute Brigade, 1st British Airborne Division. So he's part of Urquhart's crew, right? Urquhart's division has 3 battalions. John Frost is commanding one of them. He makes it to Arnhem. Each battalion is going up a different road into Arnhem. So his happens to be the most lightly defended. He makes it to town with most of his men, a few stragglers from the other 2 British Airborne battalions. And he's able to take the north side of the bridge, but crucially, not the south side. The south side stays in German hands. And what I noticed, which you don't really see in the movie, is that the 2 other battalions in Urquhart's division, they're fighting their way from the drop zone toward Arnhem as well. But they're on 2 separate pre-planned approaches, and unfortunately, these happen to be much more heavily defended than anticipated. So they suffered heavy losses, and they were prevented from coming to Frost's aid. And the CO of one of these battalions is actually depicted in Band of Brothers, Lieutenant Colonel David Dobie. And he was the architect of Operation Pegasus, well, the first Operation Pegasus, which we do see in Band of Brothers, where they evacuated a large group of men trapped in German occupied territory after the battle.
Interesting. I'd completely forgotten about that. It's kind of this really small scene in Band, I feel, where they rescue the Brits. But it's fun. I like that. That finally makes sense to me now. Great.
Yeah, context.
I feel like in Band, you don't really get a sense of Operation Market Garden, even though they're a part of it. You just feel like they have to liberate Eindhoven, and that's it.
It's true. You're really not getting the bigger picture, which is fair. I guess we're focused on what one company alone is doing.
Yeah, I do feel like they could have shown Son Bridge though, because it's such a cool thing, and also such an unfortunate thing. On the other end, near the Belgian border, the beginning of the tank and infantry drive from the south is going on. So Vandeleur's tanks proceed across a long road under the cover of smoke, but the Germans are waiting and fire upon the first ones, essentially just blocking the road and causing delay. And the road this is, it's not the road they show, I don't think, but they've renamed it Hell's Highway because it's just one long road, and it's a bad idea if you have a lot of tanks, and it's like a narrow road too, so it's not very useful.
Yeah, one of the problems they ran into a lot of the way along is that the terrain around the dike roads is not good for tanks. So they have to travel on the dike road. And of course, then you're on sort of an elevated position where you're very open to being fired at by the enemy, and you can only go one at a time. So if the front tank gets hit, you have to waste valuable time moving that tank out of the way so the next one can go.
Yeah. So the Germans do immediately take advantage of this. And I feel like Vandeleur is very optimistic. He's very keep calm and carry on. But immediately they're behind schedule, so it's not very good. And meanwhile, the 101st arrive at the Somme Bridge near Eindhoven, only to see it blown up by the Germans, which means that 30 Corps, which is Vandeleur and his armored vehicles, won't be able to cross it to get to the other bridges, so you see the problem here. And with the 101st is Colonel Robert Stout, played by Elliot Gould, whose character was based on Robert Sink, who we do hear about in Band of Brothers.
Yes, he's just the absolute beautiful stereotype of an American. He's a loudmouth. He's just he's brash. He's no nonsense. I thought he was kind of fun.
He's got a big cigar.
He is chopping on a big cigar, yes. On the German side, everyone except Field Marshal Model wants to blow up the bridges at Arnhem and Nijmegen, especially Major General Ludwig, played by Hardy Kruger. And the reason for this is obvious, right? They're like, if we blow the bridges, we prevent the Allied advance. And Model is convinced they will need the bridges to counterattack. And everyone around him is looking at the actual state of the German army, and they're like, bro, counterattack with what? Like, at this point, it's better just to cut our losses, but he's not going to listen. Someone, meanwhile, on the German side, has recovered an entire plan for Market Garden from a downed British glider, but Modal is convinced that it's a fake. He's like, they probably wanted us to find this. There's no way they're really aiming for these bridges. That can't be the plan. I'm going to stick with what I'm doing.
Spoiler alert, it is the plan.
It is the plan. In the Ryan book, he said that he wasn't able to find the actual plan or like any actual evidence that the plan was found by the Germans. He thought maybe like a part of the plan may have been found, but he wasn't actually able to find like real concrete evidence that this happened.
Interesting. Somewhere else in Arnhem, Urquhart is trying to get to the bridge on foot because of course he has no radio contact with Frost and his other battalion commanders, but he's hemmed in by the Germans everywhere, like they're all around him. So he hides in a family attic. And the attic and the house was owned by the Derksen family back then. And today it has a wooden Urquhart sign on the side of the house that you can see from the street. And you can see the window that you see Urquhart looking through in the movie. And Urquhart and two other officers hid there for about 12 hours, so that's a long time.
I read in the book, too, that apparently once the Dirksen family had hid Urquhart and his compatriots in the attic, they went next door to the neighbor's house so they could pretend that they didn't live there. So if the Germans came into the house, they would just find like an empty house and they'd be like, oh, I guess the British just came in here of their own accord. No Dutch people helps them.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. I've been to the house though. I've been to all of the places in this movie.
Amazing. Still in England, because at this point, everything's gone to shit. They've had really bad weather, so they're having a hard time. The poles are supposed to be dropped into the Netherlands, but it keeps being delayed because of fog. Sosabowski is getting more and more frustrated that the Polish drop has been canceled again. He knows that supplies and reinforcements must be desperately needed on the ground at Arnhem by now, and he is correct about that.
Yep. Again, we get to enjoy Gene Hackman. He's absolutely brilliant in this movie. I think he might be one of my two favorite characters in the movie.
Yeah, he's great.
We get a couple of little side plots in this movie. One of them is one where we follow Staff Sergeant Eddie Doan, played by James Caan. He's 101st Airborne and he picks up his quote-unquote dead captain in a jeep and narrowly escapes the Germans. This is a very, very tense scene. But the captain that he's rescuing is in fact still alive, so Doan first is an army doctor, and I thought it was Dr. Spanner that we see earlier in the movie, who is played by Laurence Olivier, but it's not that doctor, it's a different doctor. And he forces him to operate on his captain by holding him at gunpoint. And the doctor operates and then has Dawn apprehended by MPs. And he tells them to keep him here for at least 10 seconds, quote unquote. So he's like, I'm gonna have you arrested because you pointed a gun at me, but in all seriousness, he doesn't really care that much. And this is based on a true story, although Doan's first name was changed from Charles to Eddie in the movie. And also the doctor in real life did just have him arrested and it was someone else that kind of let him go. But it's a fun little scene.
Yeah. It was a brief moment of relief in the book because he comes upon his captain who's been shot in the head and has been put, and this is from the book, who's been put on a pile of corpses. And Dohan takes one look at him and he's like, I don't know, I'm getting alive vibes. So that's when he picks him up and like, everyone thinks this man is dead. Like they think this Dohan guy's crazy, but he pulls out a gun and he's like, fix my friend or else. Yeah, it was I really enjoyed that moment. I got a real kick out of it reading about it.
And the captain did survive in real life.
Not only did he survive, but he pretty much fully recovered. He had partial blindness, I think. That was the only long-term consequence of his being shot in the head.
Imagine if everybody had just left him there, he would have just died.
Yeah. The 101st, with the help of British supplies, put up an emergency Bailey Bridge at Saône. So now the armored vehicles can get across. But 30 Corps is now 36 hours behind schedule. The guys up ahead, the 82nd U.S. Airborne Division and the British 1st Airborne Division, they are starting to struggle because they were not expecting to have to hold these bridges for that long. So 30 Corps' next port of call, Nijmegen, is not going to be any easier. The 82nd Airborne are encountering stiff resistance at the highway bridge there, including armored units, which they, of course, were not expecting.
If only they'd listened to some other people.
Yeah.
Arnhem, Frost and his hardy band of survivors continue to hold the north side of the bridge, but they have many wounded and are low on ammunition. The other battalions haven't been able to reach them in any meaningful numbers, and the Germans have them effectively surrounded at this point. The Germans also control their drop zones, so they haven't been receiving any supplies or ammo, which is not very good.
Yeah. We should talk about David Lord, the pilot.
Amazing! Tell me all about him.
So there's this pilot, David Lord, and he's flying this supply plane. And he is flying over the Netherlands and he's about to drop his supplies. I believe he's carrying ammunition. And his plane gets hit and it's engulfed in flames to the point where they know that this plane is going to crash land. It's not a matter of if, but when. But he knows how much the guys on the ground need these supplies. So he does one super slow run over the drop zone and they don't manage to drop everything. So he does a second super slow run over the drop zone. Keep in mind, his plane is on fucking fire this whole time. Super slow run over the drop zone so they can drop all of their stuff and they can land it where they're supposed to. Unfortunately, after that, the plane does crash and Lord is killed along with many of his crew. And he was subsequently awarded a Victoria Cross, posthumous Victoria Cross, of course, for his actions. And the super unfortunate part that he didn't realize was that the drop zones had already been overrun by the Germans. And so all of these supplies, unfortunately, did not make it to his allied compatriots.
It's so heartbreaking, isn't it? They do a great job of showing you this in the movie because they show you the British trying to create a different sign saying, here's where to land. Come on, guys, land over here or drop over here. But they keep dropping supplies into German hands, which is just heartbreaking, but there's no radio communications, so it's really shitty.
Yeah, I think it's just hard for us to imagine now, right? The people in England have no clear sense of how things are even going. Like, they don't know what is needed and what's not needed and where everyone's at. Urquhart finally escapes from his attic and he makes it to Hotel Hartenstein, which is now the British 1st Airborne headquarters, and that's when he learns of how dire the situation has become. I mean, he saw a lot of it for himself, but now he's getting the specific grim details. He's finally able to get Frost on the radio at the bridge, but there's no good news. 30 Corps isn't coming yet. They're still going to have to hold out because the tanks are still delayed at Nijmegen. And Urquhart and the other British airborne survivors, they can't physically reach Frost and the others because there are Germans in the way. And so instead of doing that, they figure we're going to hold a bridgehead approach toward Arnhem at Oosterbeek open for as long as we can so that when the armored divisions do make it up here, they'll be able to speed there and relieve Frost at Arnhem as quickly as possible. And so Urquhart doesn't have a lot of guys either, but he's like, we're going to do our best for Frost and those guys, and we're going to try and get this corridor open, and we're going to hold it open for as long as we can.
The radio call from Urquhart to Frost is so disheartening. They're so optimistic still. Like, they know it's all shit, but still they're trying to remain optimistic.
Yeah, that whole part of the book, there's basically on one side of the bridge, you have Frost and his little merry band. And then on the other side of the bridge, you have a guy named McKay, and he has his own kind of group of guys. And it's truly wild how few guys they have. At one point at the end, McKay has 3 guys left who aren't injured. It's truly wild how low on ammunition they are, how low on people they are. They don't have food, they don't have medicine, they have basements full of wounded men, and they're still in reasonably good spirits. You know, they're still holding the line.
I can't even imagine being optimistic. But that's just me, I guess. We get another. I call it a side plot. It wasn't a side plot in Market Garden per se, but it's a little side plot in the movie because we meet Gator Horst, who is played by Liv Ullmann, and she is convinced by Dr. Spanner, played by Laurence Olivier, and the British to turn her house into a makeshift hospital. So Kate Ross is just a mother of 4 children or 5 children, I think 4. And her husband is, I don't know what he's not mayor yet, but he's got some connections with the British and he's doing a lot with the underground. And they have a beautiful house near the church in Oosterbeek. And the British show up with his doctor and they're like, please, let us make a temporary aid station of your house, and we'll only use 2 rooms, and they end up taking the entire house. But during the 8 days of fighting, Kate Horst tended to about 250 wounded British paratroopers herself, along with some orderlies, and some of her most famous actions in looking after these men included walking around her home reading the Bible to dying soldiers. And we see this in a later scene. And Kate actually wrote about her experience in her book Cloud Over Arnhem, which is a very short book, but it's no longer available. But you can buy a book called Angel of Arnhem, which has those diary entries for you to read, and I read them, and they're absolutely heartbreaking. But she's also very optimistic the entire time. Which I think is what made her and the British get along so well. And also, she was a woman looking after them, that helps too, I guess. And she starred as herself in a movie called Theirs is the Glory, which is a reenactment of the Battle of Arnhem from 1946. And you can find it on YouTube. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm looking forward to giving it a watch.
Yeah, a really cool lady. Just a reminder that, anyone can step up, you know?
And this house was a beautiful, well looked after kind of rich people's house. But she didn't give a damn about any of her belongings. She and her children stayed in the basement a lot because it was safer. But she went up there and she had like apples from her orchard and like cherry juice, which is very prominent in her diaries. And she kept giving it to the men when the water ran out and all that sort of stuff. And it's quite heartwarming to read.
I was reading in the Ryan book because he interviewed her, and he was talking about how their house was being shelled, and the wounded men are screaming and moaning, and she's just trying to put her head down and help as much as she can. And she mentions at one point an orderly just gets sick of it, and he goes out into the street and just walks straight up to a German tank and is like, Do any of you know what a fucking red cross means? And he comes back in the house and the shelling actually does die down.
Yep, and I have a funny story about Kate Horst and her husband, Jan, because after the war they adopted the grave of our pilot that we just talked about. Because his brother named Frank had actually stayed in her house as a wounded soldier, and so to adopt a grave in the Netherlands means you kind of take care of it at the cemetery, and I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah, that's lovely. The US 82nd Airborne, aware that time is running out for their embattled compatriots at Arnhem, will cross the Wall River at Nijmegen in little boats, led by Major Julian Cook, played by Robert Redford. Their mission keeps getting delayed, which means they end up having to go in daylight, which is obviously not optimal. They're crossing a river. They're in plain sight of the Germans, you know. Nearly half the men become casualties, but they are ultimately successful in securing the bridge from the other side, thereby freeing 30 Corps for the final drive up to Arnhem.
Yes. And this river is a very wide river. Like, it's not like you can just walk across this bridge in under a minute. It takes a while. And there's a thing I wanted to mention. I must have mentioned it before at some point on the podcast, but near the point where they cross, there's a new bridge. Currently, they called it the oversteek, which means the crossing. And on this bridge, there are 48 pairs of lights that turn on every sunset, and a veteran walks along them every night to honor the men who died. 48 men died, and they get honored every single night at sunset in Nijmegen. And I witnessed this once. I wouldn't say walk because I don't walk, but I got to cross the bridge when a veteran was crossing with a group of people, and we just walked behind him in silence. And it's a very moving thing to do because the lights come on one by one as you walk across. So, I don't know, it just brings the war really close again. And it's quite beautiful that they still do it. So, I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that too. That's so poignant.
At Arnhem Bridge, the Germans at this point are like, the British cannot hold out any longer. Let's talk to them about capitulation. And there's a character here called Major Harley Carlyle. He's with Frost, and he's played by Christopher Good. And he tells the Germans very cheekily that they don't have the proper facilities to take them all prisoner. And the Germans don't like it very much. And as kind of a retort, destroy Arnhem in its entirety. And both Frost and Carlyle are severely wounded. They're out of ammo, and Frost eventually has to stay behind until Germans get there.
Yeah, the Germans reach a point where they know that Frost and his guys are in hidey holes on the riverfront, and they're like, right, we are just going to put a tank shell into the floor of every single one of those buildings until they collapse, until there is nowhere for the British to hide.
That's rough.
Yeah. So there's a passage that I pulled from the Ryan book. At this point, the British are being overrun. The passage goes, at the same moment during these last hours, one final message was radioed from someone near the bridge. It was not picked up by either Urquhart's headquarters or by the British Second Army, but at the 9th SS Hohenstaufen headquarters, Lieutenant Colonel Harzer's listening monitors heard it clearly. Years later, Harzer could not recall the complete message, but he was struck by the last two sentences. Out of ammunition, God save the king.
It gives me chills, that line.
Yeah, for sure. The 10,000 men of the British 1st Airborne were expected to hold the bridge for 2 days. Approximately 700 men, the only men who made it, held it for twice as long, against unimaginable opposition. The bridge has since been renamed in John Frost's honor.
Yeah, it's called the John Frostbrug. I cross it sometimes because I work near there.
Nice.
And there's a couple of stairs leading up to the bridge, and you can see them, I think, in the movie. And if you go to those stairs, they're made of metal, so you can see all the bullet holes that are still in those stairs.
Wow.
So the character of Carlyle was based on a different man. His name was Digby Tettenwater. It's a difficult name to pronounce. But he carried an umbrella, and he once wore a bowler hat in a bayonet charge against the tanks at Arnhem Bridge. And he also disabled an armored car with his umbrella by poking the driver in the eye with it. So this is a very funny character.
I was really hoping the umbrella would make the movie because, I mean, it's based on true events. And in the book, they're talking about how he's carrying this umbrella around, and one of his fellow officers, like, they're getting the shit shelled out of them. One of his fellow officers is like, Do you think that's gonna be very helpful? And Tatum Warder goes, "My goodness, Pat, what if it rains?"
I love this man. I wish there was a book about this man.
So funny. And yeah, he talks about this in the movie, but they asked him about it after the war. They're like, "Why did you carry that umbrella around?" And he's like, "Honestly, I kept forgetting the password, so I would just carry the umbrella around because everyone would know that I had to be British."
Can't even imagine, like, the image of him wearing, like, a bowler hat in a bayonet charge.
Yeah, I mean, this guy, it's all about morale, right? I mean, they're really trying to do their best to keep calm and carry on, you know?
Yep.
Sosabowski finally gets his landing, but the Germans are waiting. Of course, the Germans are waiting because by the time the Poles landed, the British were supposed to have full control over the bridge, and at this point, they do not. So the Polish unit can't get to the rescue of Urquhart and the remaining members of the British 1st Airborne, who are trapped and increasingly in peril on the other side of the Rhine. Fighting is increasing all along the narrowing corridor held by the Allies, and the armored divisions just aren't going to make it to Arnhem. The decision is made by Browning and the generals to pull Urquhart out, and thus finally admitting that Market Garden will not succeed.
I just wanted to quickly also mention that the Polish, if you read Gator Horse's diary, she writes about the constant hope that they have that they're going to be liberated. Like, on the day of the landings, they are very convinced that they're going to be liberated, but even like 4 days in, when a Polish soldier shows up at her house, even though he's wounded, they think they're being rescued. Like, they think the Poles are here now, everything will be fine. But everything is not fine.
Yeah, oh man.
It's pretty remarkable how much hope is in her diaries, because all that she saw was just horror. Like, all these men were, like, in really poor shape. And they couldn't really be evacuated to any of the hospitals at this point, because it was too dangerous. There was fighting all around. You don't really see it that much in the movie, but Oosterbeek had some of the heaviest fighting of all in Market Garden. But
Well, well, yeah, and her husband was caught, right, on the other side of the German advance, so he wasn't able to come home. So it's this
no.
poor woman having to keep an eye on her 4 kids, and meanwhile, she's also got all of these surrogate kids, if you will, all of these young men of the airborne that she's helping.
Yeah, they named her the Angel of Arnhem for a reason, I guess. But if you
Yeah.
read her diaries, she doesn't feel like she is. She's just very, like, going about her day, but to them, she was really this wonder in hell. It's quite interesting. Dr. Spanner, who is played by Laurence Olivier, I'm sure I've already said this, but that's fine.
You definitely did say it, but I do love that we're getting Laurence Olivier 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, sure, we got lots of people to weeks in a row.
Yeah,
He's a lot older in this movie, though.
he for sure is. I didn't realize it was Laurence Olivier at first.
No, I thought Laurence Olivier was the army doctor from before, but it's not him. Anyway, he negotiates a ceasefire with the Germans to evacuate the wounded. I don't think it was him in real life, but I don't know.
No, the thing about the one in real life was that the SS medical officer who was coordinating things on the German side, if you will, had a very, I guess, specific goal in mind because after the evacuation happened, he basically approached the medical team on the Allied side and was like, "Hey, can I get a piece of paper saying that I did this?" Basically being like, "I see the writing on the wall, and if the war goes the wrong way, I was in the SS. I need something that shows that I did a good thing so that I don't get my ass handed to me when fucking Nuremberg inevitably happens, right?"
I feel like we've seen this before.
Yeah, absolutely. Urquhart and his men finally escape across the river with the help of Canadian engineers, by the way, little Canada mention. This doesn't get mentioned in the movie, but they were Canadian. And this whole escape is absolutely dire because at this point, they're having to do it at night. They are going to leave wounded men manning the guns. They're going to leave a radio guy behind on the radio. For all intents and purposes, they're making it look to the Germans like they're still fighting because they know that if once the Germans find out that they're trying to retreat across the river, it's just going to be open season. So they're trying to reduce casualties as much as they can during this escape. And man, reading about it in the book about how guys are on the beach and the officers are basically trying to prevent mass panic, and the boats are flimsy. Some of them, they're flipping over in the water. Some men decide they're going to try and swim. The current's really strong, so some men make it, some men get swept away. In the morning when the sun comes up, the Canadian engineers try to come back a couple more times to get more guys, but unfortunately at this point the Germans are fully aware of what is happening. So there's a few hundred guys who are left behind on the other shore and they have to figure out what they're going to do. Are they going to hide and wait for the next night? Are they going to try and swim? So it's a horrible scenario. Urquhart obviously has been through the most in the past few days, and he gets invited to meet with Browning. And he shows up in his wet uniform, and it's absolutely to make a point. They give him the opportunity to change his clothes, and he's like, I'm not doing it. I want this guy to look me in the fucking face and see what happened to us.
Yeah, I feel like I don't remember where I read this, but I think only about 3,000 out of the 10,000 people that were dropped got back or something. Like, the numbers are
Yeah,
really bad.
Yeah, brutal, like, just unimaginable casualties. As this stretches on, right, as it goes past 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, and Urquhart and his men are fighting for their lives effectively, and they're trapped on the other side of the river, he's drafting these messages that have to be coded before they can be sent, right? So he'll draft a message, he hands it to his guy who does the coding for him, and the messages are like, "Yeah, we're really low on ammunition, we don't have much food, we don't have much medicine, we're still holding out, but, like, could really use relief in the next 24 hours," and so on and so forth. And then at a certain point, he drafts a message that he hands to his coder guy. And he's like, I want you to code this, but I don't want you to send it yet. And the coder guy reads it, and it's basically his admission that we can't hold out anymore. And the coder guy is just absolutely stunned because to have a British Army officer admit that, like, this is it, we're fucked, it's over, was just absolutely staggering to him. And so, yeah, it was just one of those things where, yeah, you drop with 10,000 guys and like 2,500 guys make it back, probably not good.
No, it's a very bad thing. It kind of ends sadly because it ends on a scene where Kate and her children abandon their entirely ruined home with only a cart of their belongings that they have left. And we watch wounded soldiers everywhere at the headquarters, everywhere else, kind of sitting in a field singing Abide with Me as they're waiting to be captured by the Germans. So that's how the movie ends.
Yeah, and no end card on this one.
No, surprising! I was also looking for one, but there wasn't one. But they did have a very long opening scene, I guess.
That's true. And I mean, we can provide an end card. We can tell people what happened next.
Sure, because this is very important and it also connects nicely to another episode we've done. Go on!
Yeah. So when Market Garden failed, as we mentioned at the beginning, Eisenhower all along had really wanted to take the port in Antwerp in order to fix their supply line issues. And now that this mighty thrust into Germany wasn't happening, he returned to his original plan. And so the 1st Canadian Army was tasked with clearing the Scheldt estuary in Belgium and the southwestern Netherlands. That campaign was known as the Battle of the Scheldt in October to November 1944 and opened the port of Antwerp to Allied shipping. And you can listen to our episode about the Forgotten Battle if you would like to learn more about that.
It's called De Slag om de Schelde in Dutch, because I want to be Dutch for a second. But it makes you wonder, right? If they'd done this first, would the war have ended differently?
Yeah, for sure. And it's always, it's always a clash of personalities, right? Who's going to manage to convince Eisenhower that he should throw all of the resources behind their army and their plan?
Yeah, it's really tricky. It kind of makes you wish that we were all, like, properly on the same side instead of having our own agendas.
I did laugh because Montgomery was known for being just really British, like kind of conservative in his battle plans typically. And so for him to come up with this plan that was kind of really imaginative was very out of character. And even the Germans said so. They were like, wait. This was Montgomery's idea? No way.
Yeah, I think there's a scene in the very beginning where they're kind of talking about whether they wanted Monty's plan or Patton's plan, and they for sure thought it was going to be Patton's plan, and it ended up being Montgomery's plan.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we should rate this movie.
Sure. How many umbrellas with bowler hats out of 10 would you rate this movie?
I would rate this movie 8 umbrellas with bowler hats out of 10, I think. I really enjoyed it. I didn't really enjoy it the first time I watched it, but the second time I was kind of prepared and I knew a little bit more about Market Garden. And it feels really true to history for me, but without being really dreadfully boring, so I did enjoy it. And it's funny in places, and The pacing's alright. It's a bit slow, but it's not terrible. And the music is fun, and all the practical effects are great. And of course, I get to recognize all the places that I know, which is always fun. So I think it might be one of those that I really enjoy. Maybe a couple times, not a couple times a year, but maybe once a year. I don't know. How about you?
I think they did a really good job of capturing simultaneously this creeping, paralyzing sense of dread as it becomes clear that the Allied advance is stalling and the Germans are getting more in reinforcements and are slowly but surely starting to beat them back. Simultaneously, right up until the end, so many people are hopeful that, if we just get that one drop, if we just get across this bridge, we can succeed. And I really felt that this movie was emotionally evocative. I thought they did a good job of giving each of the characters, their own motivations and their own sense of devotion to this plan, whether or not they thought it was a good idea. We get to see them maybe wrestle with that a little bit and ultimately, in the case of Browning, etc., have to face up to the consequences of their actions. And yeah, it's like a very human thing to take the big swing and then to fail. I think that this is really the first time looking at the maps and reading the Ryan book, which by the way, I can't recommend enough. It's great. This was the first time that I also really got a firm handle on Market Garden, I think. Yeah, this movie does a great job. The acting's really good. I love Robert Redford, man. I was so excited to see him in this movie. I'm so glad that we have Kate, for example, a lady with something to do. Yeah, so I think I'm going to give it 8.5 bowler hats and umbrellas out of 10. I definitely recommend it. It's a little long, but I think if you commit to it, you won't be disappointed.
And also, I would recommend watching it twice, because the first time it might be a little bit confusing if you haven't looked at the map, but the second time it makes much more sense. Are you reading anything, Sam?
I am. I'm reading Enemy at the Gates: The Battle for Stalingrad by William Craig, and there is a movie based on this that has Jude Law in it, so perhaps we will talk about that soon.
Perhaps, perhaps.
Are you reading anything?
Well, I was reading the Gator Horst book, Angel of Arnhem, but I finished in one day, so I'm no longer reading
Yay!
it. It's a good book. There are like letters from the people that stayed in her house to her later. There's a bunch of photos in there. Like Urquhart, who had never met her, obviously had wanted to meet her after she was flown out to England and all that sort of stuff. And she survived the war with her husband, and she died in 1992 when she and her husband were hit by a car in front of the house on the sidewalk. And it's really sad. And another sad thing that I think I should mention, because it's kind of a stark reminder that there was a war, is that her oldest son, Pike, he died in 1948 because he stepped on a landmine that was left behind from World War II.
Ugh.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, just the civilian costs, even in the aftermath.
Right. And in the book also, there's a report of her husband who became acting mayor of Renkum, which is one of the regions where this all took place. And he wrote about after the English left, the civilians were used to dig mass graves and bury all the dead. They were forced to do all this for the Germans, so it's not like they were left alone after
No,
that.
and if I'm not mistaken, there were some areas that were completely the Germans made everyone leave their homes, right? They were evacuated and they were taken
Yeah.
elsewhere until the end of the war?
Yes. In Oosterbeek, for example, there was an official evacuation. The Germans showed up and told everyone to leave, and they didn't give them much of a choice. What else did I want to say about Kate? Kate actually did advise a little bit on the movie. She wrote to Attenborough and about the script, and she told him to change a couple things, and he did. So, yay!
I love that. One of my favorite things about the Ryan book was that he spoke to Eisenhower, Montgomery, like all these big ticket guys after the war because he was a journalist. So he was able to sit down with all these people. But he also talked to Kate and he talked to all these Dutch civilians and he didn't just talk to the important guys. He's quoting from everybody. He's quoting from Brian Urquhart, who tried to warn everyone. He's quoting from, Browning, who has his own thoughts and feelings about how things went or how things should have gone. So yeah, I really enjoyed the breadth of experiences.
Excellent. I'm excited to maybe get my hands on one of his books because there's another one. So I don't know where I'll start, but it sounds like something I might really enjoy.
Definitely.
That's it for this week. Thank you everybody for listening. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts or rate us 5 stars. We would really like it if you did. You can send this episode to a friend who would enjoy a guy with an umbrella in the middle of a war. You can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast, or you can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com, for more information. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.